Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 469, a very nice episode of Constructive Criticism. It's not the nicest we've ever had, but it's a pretty nice one. I'm joined by my co-host, a man who was promoted this week, Abe Stein.
It's a long story, but basically, I've gone from being in training to be a manager of a branch of a bank. Then I was in training to be taking over for the manager of a bank when his kid is born, to his wife's water broke on Saturday. And so now it's just me. All of it goes through me from now until the end of the year. So,
and a man who, that joke doesn't make any sense, and Mason Clark.
That's me, baby. I'm here. I'm gaming. I've, in the last 2 hours, decided that I'm going to the Apex gaming event this weekend, so I can't wait to go play that. That's going to be a bunch of fun. If you're there, make sure to say hi. You're not a bother. I get to game. Then next week I'm in Durham, and I'm gaming too. So I'm just battling a bunch, taking a week off, going back to Columbus. I'm all over the place now, Spencer. I'm in my gamer era.
Mason, I have a fan on me. I've got, it is the first week under 100 degrees in a while in Utah. And like, I'm so happy with my life. Like, my t-shirt is like one of those sports tees that like, and you're wearing a hoodie.
Yeah, we're in a Magic brand hoodie too. It looks dope and feels like, even better.
For those who don't know, Mason has his AC set at what, 61?
No, I have my AC set to 64. I'm an adult.
All right. I don't know how that's different. How does your AC not freeze?
I don't know. Might be a problem.
Do you change the filter?
Yeah, every now and again. But like,
I don't. How?
It's all new.
How is this your life? I want to live your charmed life where I get to set my AC to a literal refrigerator.
Yum.
All right.
Do you leave your milk out, Mason?
No, that'd be weird. I don't have milk. I'm a human, not a cow.
That would be weird. I don't have milk. How do you cook?
I'm not a calf.
I don't. Abe, always improving to the point of the show. We're not going to talk about whatever just happened. You had the wonderful ability to take the last week off as you were transitioning into this awesome new part of your life. I'd love to hear whether it's magic, whether it's life, like how have you embraced the always improving mentality that this podcast tries to help others with?
My always improvement from the last 2 weeks now, because I was out last week, actually comes from something I alluded to, like, I think 4 weeks ago now, talking about how I've kind of laid out a bit of a plan for myself in terms of where I'm like going to focus on improving. And like part of this was giving myself some time away from playing a lot of Magic after feeling pretty burnt out from the back-to-back kind of like rushes of doing RCs. And that has been, for the last 2 weeks, just getting back into playing some Magic. I really hadn't played anything at all since the RC. I was able to play like a team tournament, like locally 2 weeks ago, played some mono green there, got to learn some things about like the Boy Lotus matchup, which was out jamming in the streets. Felt good to do that, with the arena chaos draft back on, or like now on for Magic 30 on arena. I've been doing a ton of those, and it's been really fun. So really just enjoying engaging with Magic again, making it like a big part of my time commitment before I get anything really intentional about it. Just like being like, yo, these are things I like doing. This is what I enjoy, and doing that. So I can, especially as I, talk about how a lot of this new responsibility on my plate, a lot of things competing for the same time, making the space for it where it's something that's going to be additive and not additional work for me, but something where I'm remind myself, oh yeah, Magic is kind of the bomb. So yeah, that's been my last couple weeks.
Mason, what did you do to improve Magic this week?
So I get to finally talk about something. It's me improving a while ago. So at the beginning of the year, I was gone for January and for February. And that's because, as you see on the video podcast, I was out working at Wizards of the Coast on the Modern Horizons 3 set, which I'm very excited for. But seriously, I know I'm joking here. I blue screen or green screened in some of the art from the MH3 announcement. But yeah, I got to go and actually work on the sets, much like Brad Nelson and BBD and Sam Black and Jerry Thompson in the past. I was one of those people to work on MH3. And I learned a lot of valuable lessons, some of which I can't quite talk about right now. But the biggest thing I learned while working there, and I wanted to be able to talk about, was setting expectations for yourself. I had a lot of really hefty expectations on myself, right? I just mentioned the people who have previously worked on these sets, right? Brad Nelson, Jerry Thompson, BBD, right? Sam Black. These are some of the names that all of you know, and it's not a question. And on the team with me was, Brad Nelson once again. And it's like, wow, these are really strong, heavy players. I think I am quite good at Magic. The difference between me and them is so large, I think it is hard to describe. And I put a lot of pressure on myself, especially at the beginning, to make sure that I came in and like did good work and everything like that. And I think I did. But the bigger thing was realizing like, hey, just because those guys have done so much at Magic and done so well, I shouldn't be comparing myself to them, which is something I've learned in the past from Magic. And I should be focusing on what am I here to do? I'm here to do my goals for the set. And I'm here to, help make part of Magic and be a part of Magic history and get to do this. And so it was a dream come true to get to do that. And it was a really great reminder of like, hey, I shouldn't compare myself to anyone else. I shouldn't judge myself by anyone else. I should just do the best I can. I was picked for this and I was chosen for this. And like, I should just trust myself that if I was picked for this and they think I can do it, that I can do it. And it doesn't matter if I'm not as good as Jerry or I'm not as good as Sam Black. It's cool. I can just get it done. So that was mine. And I'm really excited to talk to you two about it. When the MH set comes out, I'm really excited to see everyone. And I can't wait for the Pick 2 set review episode with you two. I am very, very excited. There were a lot of moments internally where I was like, ooh, I think Abe would like this, or ooh, Spencer might like this, or inversely. And I'm excited for y'all to see it and have those conversations in just, 10 months or whatever, 11 months. So
yeah, just to peel back the curtain a little bit, like, what can people expect from the podcast from you over the next like few months, as far as like, what is Mason allowed to talk about? What is Mason not allowed to talk about? And this isn't just for listeners, like as the host of the show, like I want to make sure that I'm not putting you in awkward positions. Like how do you think that like we talk about Assassin's Creed or we talk about Fallout, like we talk about the power level of different formats. How does that impact you?
Yeah, so I guess for full clarity, I also worked on Assassin's Creed as well. So I worked on Modern Horizons 3. I worked on that set a lot, and I more consulted on Assassin's Creed. And so really what it means is I'm not going to say anything about the sets. If it's not public, I'm not going to talk about it. And when it comes to power level, when we get to the Pick 2 set review, I'm just simply going to sit out of sleepers and hits. I'm going to let these two guys sort of take one of my picks each and let them do their thing, because I think that it wouldn't even be that big a deal if I said it, but I think there loses a lot of mystery and a lot of the excitement of that. And so, I've had a year and some change at that point to work with the cards in my head, and I think about them a lot. And so I'm much more interested in not engaging in that way. But as cards come out, I am going to have conversations, and if during preview, like to use Delight Halfling as an example, right? Like that was a card we were all talking about, or whatever. And like if that had been a Modern Horizons card and it was brought up in Delight Halfling, I would talk to y'all about Delight Halfling, but I probably wouldn't let you in on where I think it is power level wise. And then my plan is when the set is officially out for one day, I'm going to then sort of say, here's what I think are the strong cards. Because I think one day with the set, there's more games are played than I ever could. And it's just like, we're going to have a good idea on a lot of initial impressions. And so, while I think my impressions are better than that, it's just like, I don't know, there's no real embargo on it. I just can't talk about things that aren't public knowledge. So, it's going to be cool. It's going to be fun. I'm really excited. I wish they had shown a card, but that's life, baby. Spencer, what's your always improving moment?
I'm like a really transparent person. So this weekend, we were supposed to have our podcast meeting. I'm supposed to be posting a schedule for the podcast about like what the next 2 months look like on the show. And I had a really rough Saturday night into Sunday morning where some feelings came up where I like to normalize this, but I want to give a trigger warning that like this is something that maybe you deal with a lot and like you don't want to hear about it, but like I was really struggling with suicidal thoughts this weekend. In turn with that, I usually don't play my best Magic when I'm sad. I was talking to Matt Kling about this week, where I'm really good at playing Magic when I'm trying to prove a point to myself or to other people. Like, even if it's like people being mean to me or whatever, but I'm not really good at playing Magic sad. But two of my best friends, co-host of Neat to Nerd, and then the owner of the store that, we're in conversations with the sponsor, future types of giveaways and events and KFAB games, they wanted me to go to the Oasis Games Store Championship with them, play Modern. And I woke up that morning, I could not get out of bed. and I let Dave and Mason down, called my friend, and it was a really good conversation where I think that pretty often when you're in this type of mental space, you hear these stories of people like overcoming it and just like get out there and do it and like whatever. And like, it's so, once you do that, it's so easy. And that is actually not the experience I had. And I want to be really transparent about the experience I had. I did misplay in round 2 where I was 1-0, where my opponent had a Mags of Moon in play because of their Ignoble Hierarch in their Yogg deck, where I just registered it as a Blood Moon and minus my Karn to get a Haywire Might instead of the Pyrite Spellbomb that was in my board specifically for this situation. And I went on to lose that match in game 3 of that exact situation. And then in game 3 of round 4, playing for top 4 of this store championship, I had another moment where I overthought things and tried to double spell because I got too greedy rather than just playing an Oblivion Stone and cracking it. And I got by a protection spell out of Hammer. And what's so interesting to this is that I'm really happy with myself for leaving the house, for bringing myself into a position where I got to have fun and use Magic as an escape, even though, as usual, I did not play well when I was sad. And I think that my always improving moment here is taking opportunities to have opportunities even when you're not going to play your best. And too often when you get to the point where I think that I and many of our listeners and you guys are at Magic, it would be easier to just not play Magic because I knew I wasn't going to play my best. But what happened is I put myself in a situation where I was able to be with friends. I was able to think about my Tron list that I'm going to have to play this 1K because there were no bans today, especially considering like I'm going to have to share sagas, so I'm going to play sagas on my Tron list. Like there was a lot of learning opportunities there that even though I didn't play my best, I know exactly where I misplayed. Both of them I would have just 4-0'd and like, been in top 4 and whatever. It doesn't matter. It's a store championship. I still got the promos and stuff, but I don't know. It was an interesting thing to like play through the darkness, whereas I don't think I would do that normally.
Obviously, I personally really appreciate the transparency. I know that that's something that is really important to you to have on the podcast of what, just being a place where we can talk about what it is we're going through, always improving through all that. There's something that even outside of like, as drastic as maybe what you were feeling, what you were going through on the weekend. First, I want to say that, for all the listeners concerned that we didn't have our meeting, we're going to be fine. There's going to be an episode next week. We're still going to be okay. But also that my, something that I forget where I read it in like a book, I think called Elements of Poker. But the player who wrote that book, he talked a lot about like your A game and like your B game and your C game as like when you're playing your best, that's your A game, right? When you're like really on. Your B game is kind of when you're just playing your average, and your C game is when you're right, like playing some of your worst. And he talked about in terms of like, if you're a cash poker player trying to play for a living, it's important to understand, what is your strength? Is your strength that you have a really high floor on your C game? Is it that you have a really high floor on your A or a high ceiling on your A game? And, it sounds to me like, Spencer, you're really engaging with this area of what your C game is and being in the space of being able to engage and being willing to play, because there's times in everyone's Magic where you got to play. Sometimes your day 2, you wake up, you feel really bad. Something's going on in your personal life. The same weekend as the Grand Prix. Like all these things have happened to I think all of us, where there's things outside of the Magic tournament that are affecting you, and getting chances to engage with that I think is really important if you want to be, a successful tournament player, to balance right both your existence as a human being and also your existence as a Magic player. So I just want to say kudos to you for engaging with that and putting that out there and really lifting up or putting in a little bit of work with your C game and identifying, maybe next time if you're playing in a state where it's hard for you, you can say, I need to take the extra time on even the small decisions, right? Like my Karn minus, let me just double check the board and look at it and be like, okay. Because right, if you're cognizant you're going to be playing, a little worse, you're a little more distracted, taking that time for yourself could help. And So,
It's actually really funny because I thought about grabbing the Pyrite Spellbomb. I was like, well, I don't have red mana. Like, my brain was clearly off.
yeah.
It just was like, it was clearly off. And then I was like, then I made the decision. And then I was like, well, I don't even have the green mana. Like, I actually had 2 Force in play. I was like, I don't even have the mana to pop this to hit the Blood Moon. Also, and he's got the Yogg in play, so, like, he'll just kill this after I already made the decision. And then it passes back to my next turn. And I look at this Haywire Might in my hand, and I was like, oh my gosh. 1, I had the red mana. And 2, like...
Yeah.
Oh, so bad.
2, that's a creature.
2, it's a creature. It's not a Blood Moon.
3, it's not an artifact or enchantment.
Yeah, it's so bad. It's so bad. And what's so funny is, like, this player actually popped off when they beat me. It's actually their second time beating me. We played, like, 6 or 7 times. I've beaten them, and, like, they're actually the Yogg player that I beat to qualify for the RC in San Diego. Actually, this was going to be something I want to talk about on the podcast, so I'm actually glad that we got here. Where I outplayed them a lot to qualify for San Diego, and when they beat me, they popped off and they, like, got really upset at themselves. This is just my personal opinion. If you're playing against me and you draw a 1-outer or a 2-outer and you, like, have played really well, or you made a mistake and you've overcome that, feel free to pop off. I think we take Magic too seriously. I think that it is okay to show emotion, and this player got really upset with themselves for showing that emotion. And I, like, told him, I was like, dude, you did not upset me. I also probably would have felt what you felt and would have wanted to do what you did. You do not need to feel bad. And I think that we as Magic players need to take this game less seriously and allow ourselves to show that.
Or just grow up. And if someone beats you, it's like, cool. Then they popped off and they were excited.
Yes.
And I was playing the finals of the Pro Tour, and Abe mulls to 1, and I run him over. Do you know what I'm doing after I beat Abe? I'm popping off in Abe's face, you know? Yeah, get wrecked, kid.
Listen, I grew up playing Little League. Handshake your game. That's all it is.
Well, what's so funny is, like, I like, shook his hand. He got upset. I was like, dude, you do not be upset. Like, I was like, giving him the fist bump. I think that, like, he was so upset of himself because he, like, drew the Court of Calling that he needed to win the game on his last draw because he was at 1 going to 2 going to 1. And I was like, dude, you do not need to be upset with yourself. Like, just embrace it. Like, this is the highs of Magic. This is the moments we live for. And I hope that, like, you know, and maybe it was me being in that darkness, right? Like, me being in this, like, I wanted one of those moments that day. And the fact that he got it actually gave me, like a little bit of lifeblood. So, well, that's going to do it for this. However, we have one thing to talk about before we bring into our guest, which, if you don't look at the title of the episode, we didn't announce before, that Dom Harvey's joining the show in just a second. I want to talk about the BNR announcement. And last week, Mason, you put me on a trajectory where I doubted my own sanity. Because they said what I thought they were going to say today. It's not your fault. I'm just teasing you. Where, like, I thought that there would be no bans. I was like, there's no reason to ban anything. You're like, no, Spencer, there's only 1 ban a year. And I was like, oh, that changes.
There is.
That until today, when they announced that the older formats would be under consideration for every 3 months.
Well, yeah. Well, they have emergency ban windows, is what they call it, which I told you about last week.
Yeah, but it sounded like that was for, like, standard cards.
No, they're not banning standard cards forever. Standard forever, no bans.
No
for
bans.
years.
But I'm actually curious. So today it was announced we have an unban of Preordain in Modern and an unban of Mind's Desire in Legacy. I'll go first.
Humegalol.
What?
I said Humegalol when you said Legacy. Like
sure.
What's
WH Omega.
So I'll go first. I totally expected unbans, as this seemed like a really good time for it. I really loved Mason's stream. We talked about it last week on the show. Mason goes over stuff. I thought that Green Sun Zenith and Splinter Twin might be getting unbanned. Like, that is where my head was at. Only because and the reason I didn't consider Preordain or Ponder was because of how direct they've been with cantrip printings in the last X years. Like, it seems so prescriptive that they had just decided these cards. We actually had a whole thread in our Patreon Discord about, like, what is the proper power level for a cantrip in Modern? Because to me, it is preordained. Like, that is actually it. So we see that today. I've already had discussions with teammates. I've already had some thoughts around this. Jess had a really good tweet where she talked about how it's really good for Breach. I totally agree with that.
Follow up. Do you want the follow up from that one?
Yeah.
Did you see it? She said it was awful after playing with it.
Nice. Nice. I'm not on Twitter, so like I only see the stuff from the CC account like while I'm refreshing. But Preordain is like in this interesting spot where one, Orcish Bowmaster exists. Like we're now in Orcish Bowmaster's world, and Preordain looks really bad there. But if it is, Dom's enjoying the show, he'll talk a little bit about this, but like, if you're comboing off, it seems really good. If you're doing it turn one, it seems really good. My first thought when I saw it was like, oh man, this makes Ledger Shredder so better. And then I was like, oh my gosh, Ledger Shredder's unplayable. Why did I just think that? Abe, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts on Preordain, I wasn't here last week, but I did have some thoughts on Modern that I was sharing with Mason when we were catching up after the episode, because I just listened to it. And I think something that really important to understand about the Modern format right now, and especially over the last, I want to say honestly, like the last year since Modern Horizons 2, is that, at least to me, the format has existed in this balance, like the pitch elementals actually and the card economy involved being the most important thing in the format. So like before Lord of the Rings and before the One Ring, it was really that, you know, there was kind of this balance of, well, if you want to get up on cards enough to recoup the loss of having to 2-for-1 yourself on your opponent's stuff, you need to be finding a way to do that, right? Like Risen Reef, Yorion plus like cantrip things, like that was a big pattern of it. And Renin 6 the only way to get up in actual cards. Preordain doesn't actually change anything about that. The One Ring really changed everything about that, where now there's a card that just singularly recoups all of the actual cardboard invested into the game, and has really changed the rules of engagement of the format. I really don't. I think Preordain feels kind of safe because the format's just not about those things, and kind of the fall of Murktide shows that as well, where Murktide was a deck where it's really good at being very efficient and having a lot of the good 1-for-1 exchanges, and then having something that was overcoming the like interactions, and expressive iteration was enough card advantage to get ahead.
I just want to call out that I think that didn't Murktide win both challenges this weekend?
I'm not familiar with challenge results from this weekend.
Yeah, I almost wonder. Hang on, we should maybe pause some with this. I wonder if this is a moment that we had talked about like last week, Spencer, where at the end of what Abe says, you should maybe say that. That makes sense.
That's good.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's really where we see like the fall of Murktide over the PT, is that like the format is so defined by these decks that are like generating a lot of card advantage, and Murktide previously had the best ways to get a little bit ahead, right, in expressive iteration. Or I guess the blue black version's having Sauron's Ransom, like just taking the 1-for-1s really well and then getting ahead just a little bit. And the format's gotten less about that, and Preordain is actually really good for decks that are trying to do exactly that or set up something unfair, right? The card selection, I think it's actually pretty similar to Serum Visions in terms of what it does for the unfair decks, unless you're trying to go off on that turn. Looking for a specific card can be different, but there's a lot less of that in the combo decks currently in the format. But overall, I don't think this changes a ton about the rules of engagement of the format. I think it's going to be a card that's going to make a lot of decks play just a little bit smoother. I think it's going to make like the Delirium things with Dragon Red Channeler just a little bit smoother, because now your sorcery is a little bit better. But overall, you know, I just wanted to kind of take a minute to talk about that in terms of what I felt was kind of going on in Modern. So I get a chance to share that last week, as well as kind of how Preordain fits into that. And so we'll see, you know, how that really changes things. But
I think Murktide is like a really interesting place, Abe, because if you listen to last week's show, Mason and I talked about Lorien Revealed, or is that the name of the card? Yeah, as like this. It's like another cantrip for the deck that is also a pitch card, that is also it fills a lot of roles, right? And I think that Preordain has a lot to compete with. One of the things that was said in our Discord is like, oh, this just feels better than Consider, like, as a card. And one of the things that I said, I think, Mason, that you agreed with, is like, yes, Preordain is a better card to Consider. That does not mean that all of your decks that want a cantrip want Preordain over Consider. I think Murktide is actually the perfect example of a deck that actually probably wants Consider over Preordain. Even though you want the sorcery, there are other ways to get sorceries from your yard, like Lorien's Revealed or Reveled or whatever it is a really good way to, like, you can play 2 or 3 of those, play some subtleties in your main, maybe even play some force notifications depending on how the format plays out. You have these really good pitch cards that also are a cycler or a cantrip that, like, kind of fit your narrative a little bit better.
I have a lot of thoughts on the Preordain unban, but the biggest one comes to people being like, I'm going to cut 4 Considers from my deck and put 4 of these in and for Murktide, and that's going to fix my Murktide deck. And it's like, you're a counterspell deck that really wants to leverage having the right spells at the right time, that also uses DRC, Heat, Unholy Heat, and Murktide. And so the fact that it puts cards to the yard really matters. And I think that, like, we saw players like Alan Wu play, I think it was 2 Serum Visions for Murktide the Pro Tour. And, like, doing something like that where your flex slots are these these Preordains, or, Lorraine's Reveal, and all these different, there's a lot of different ways you can move things. But, like, that is, like, a reasonable direction to go. But a thing that I keep telling people when they ask me about Murktide with Preordain is like, well, yeah, traditionally, Jund decks all played cantrips or whatever, right? Your 1-for-1 deck doesn't really want to play too much of cards that are just about finding the right card. And that's what Preordain is about. Preordain is about setting up to find the card you want. So that's why it's stronger in theory in a deck like Underworld Breach, Breach combo, where it actually is working towards winning the game, and it's not working towards, like, finding the counter spell to fight the fight. Playing sorcery speed and not getting to react, not enabling your synergies is a really big drawback. And, I do think that Modern is really hostile right now to combo decks. Like Force Negation, Ragavan, Spell Pierce, Counterspell, Thoughtseize, Grief. Those cards all make it really hard to be a combo deck and to be having about a specific card at a specific point. So this unban is really good because we know traditionally that decks that are about card advantage don't love to have Preordain, and the Consider graveyard, like, interaction makes it so, like, there's some thought to it in Modern, and it's not just 1-to-1. So in a lot of ways, I think this unban is just one of those situations where it's like, we live in a different world, and there are some things that we can take off, and this is a way to sort of try and help combo decks and really, take someone who's playing their combo deck and give them that extra 1% win rate and open up some new rooms. So I'm really excited to see, like, Twiddlestorm, Belcher, Oops All Spells, those sort of decks. I do think the logic for it in Breach is
high on my list for this card, by the way. That was really high.
Yeah, the problem traditionally is those decks can't beat Murktide, Grief type, or like Ragavan decks with interaction. That is the problem. But we'll see, like, maybe Preordain lets you, get a little bit more consistent, and the format changes enough because of the One Ring where, like, there can be space for them. So I think it's going to be really interesting. I think it makes sense and stuff, but,
I think Orcish Bowmaster laughs at this up, man, for what it's worth. Like, if you're ever going to try to do a fair deck doing this thing, like, for example, there was a joke in our Discord about, like, blue-white, for example, and how, like, maybe blue-white could be like, oh, just unban Stoneforge Mystic and Jason the Mind Sculptor. And, like, Stoneforge, Jason the Mind Sculptor, Preordain, like, is a real package that, like, was legacy playable for a hot minute. Maybe it was Ponder and Brainstorm, not Preordain, but
it was Ponder and Brainstorm.
Yeah. Yeah. But my point is that the idea of doing something like that, I don't think it works anymore. Like, that's not the fair Preordain games. Preordain was a cursor because you didn't have something to do with your mana, and using your mana was important, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just so hard to not build a deck where you have something to do with your mana, whether it's Lightning Bolt, whether it's Spell Pierce, whether it's the new 1-mana counter creature thing. Like, there are just so many things to do with your mana now. I think that it's a really safe unban.
Also, I really think, we talked about last week, we had the little Twitch clip too, whatever, that was like, the format's about the One Ring and Orcish Bowmaster. Orcish Bowmaster is really like that one friend in college whose other friend became a big star and is now, like, riding their coattails. That card is good, but it is not, like, if the One Ring wasn't in the format, we would not see as much Bowmaster as we do now, or at least not like, oh, it's clearly Bowmaster you should play. So I'm really interested to see sort of how things go and how they evolve. But yeah, it was interesting, and it's probably time we get talking to Dom.
And we're joined by Pro Tour top 8 competitor Dom Harvey, host, co-host, creator of Dominari's Judgment, the king of Amulet Titan. How's it going, Dom?
It's going good. I like hearing that Pro Tour top 8 competitor part. Nice new label in there. Not going to get tired of hearing that one anytime soon. So anyone who encounters me, feel free to repeat that. Any context you like.
Well, Pro Tour top 8 competitor Dom Harvey, thank you so much for joining us on the show. We were really glad to have you.
Yeah, as a Pro Tour top 8 competitor with 61 cards main, it's you're in unique, special company.
Yeah, a bigger number better, as I believe certain co-hosts have been known to say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they do say that. They do say that.
You've definitely now become one of the people to top 8 Pro Tours with the most cards. You've leapfrogged an entire category of players who've top 8 the Pro Tour before. In terms of number of cards they've had.
I'm already in like that 99th percentile now, just by virtue of that. And I'm there with like Nassif, and then also just random people from 1994 before any of us knew how to build decks properly. So for my next trick, 62 cards, that's going to really get me in that upper tier.
What's really great about it is like anybody who correctly like played like 43 or like 40x cards in their limited deck, you still just outpace them dramatically on averages of number of cards for Pro Tour decks because you didn't construct it.
Well, yeah, I'm leaving all of those limited pools behind in the dust. They really can't compete.
For those who don't know, we kind of introduced you as the Titan guy, this top 8 competitor. But who is Dom Harvey for the listeners? Like, who is this person that we've invited on the show after just such an amazing finish?
Well, that's a very deep question. So I guess foothold in competitive Magic would really begin with a lot of the SEG stuff in 2019. Won an Open with Amulet there, and then became known as one of the Amulet guys, from Canada, who would come down from the north and do their thing. Managed to broaden my range a bit over the years following that, but now I'm really back in one-trick territory, I suppose. But have broadened my range in other ways. So podcaster, as you said, commentator, coach, like to kind of dabble in various aspects of Magic. Still write weekly for SEG, and then blog occasionally when the fancy takes me. So I don't know, just love playing Magic, love talking about Magic, thinking about it, and take chances to do that whenever they crop up.
Is there things about you mentioned your SCG beginnings? Is there things about Amulet in the SCG tour that kind of brought you to the forefront? Like, was there a thing about Amulet at that time that really spoke to Dom specifically?
By that point, I'd already been playing it for a few years, and it was just a default deck that I loved and would take any chance to play. There was other stuff. I was a KCI main for a while, and would jump around between a few different things. But yeah, I mean, I qualified for my first PT with Amulet Bloom back when the Bloom part was still around. And ever since I started learning the deck, like I was not good at it at first. It took me a long time, like it does for a lot of other people, but recognized that, oh yeah, this is something I know I'm going to love once I finally get over that initial hurdle. And sure enough, 8 years later, here we are.
So you talked about kind of your first Pro Tour there. How does kind of qualifying for your first PT with Summer Bloom and then having that encapsulated in your last Pro Tour, how does that story like evolve? How does that make up Dom Harvey?
Well, it's a great story arc, and I'd be lying if that romantic aspect, I guess, didn't play into my deck choice here to some extent. I did sincerely try a bunch of other decks and was waffling between Amulet and Tron and a few other decks up until the 11th hour, but just the fact that I had that sheer quantity of experience with the deck, and then also it felt like a fitting homage. I'd been playing the deck for so long. Usually if I had some kind of high stakes tournament, that would be my go-to. And if I didn't play it, I would regret it. And so the fact that on this bigger stage now, I would actually get to like play my baby in a format that was seen as being like pretty hostile to it, and the deck had fallen off the map. There was something romantic about that, even if, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that choice to others.
Yeah, I actually really love that you top 8'd because, and I think you mentioned this on your podcast as well, but it's something about like Modern has always had someone in the top 8, or it's been a format where it's like, hey, if you're really good with your deck, even if your deck is maybe a tier 2 or like not the best choice in the world, you can succeed if you're a master with it. And you are sort of that person, unless some of those other players are that for Rhinos or Tron, I just didn't know it. But, though you were that person in this top 8 where it's like, hey, I play Amulet all the time. I've dedicated thousands of hours, to writing a guide, let alone learning the deck, So like, I am here ready to go and sort of shown that like, hey, this can overcome, being not the most optimal choice, quote unquote.
I'm glad that person was me, of course, but I think it's important to have someone in that role, whether it's John Guy or whoever. Just I think especially at the lower levels of modern, so LGS, RCQ kind of level, you need to have that kind of continuity there, where if it is all just MH2 cards, now Lord of the Rings cards, and next year it's going to be MH3 cards and so on, then you want there to be something you can kind of like hold on to for stability. And so the idea that, you can just play the deck that you love and you update it for the new foes that you're going to face and you switch a few cards around, but you can still compete, even if it's not a great choice. I think that's pretty essential for modern having that grassroots support and being a popular competitive format. So it's nice to have some of that represented at the Pro Tour level, and even nicer that it's me, of course.
I got to ask you, you mentioned like there being that guy. What do you think has helped make you become that guy? Like, what are the things that helped you level up in Magic through RCQs, through PTQs, through, SCGs? Like, what is the thing that you've learned the most through your Magic journey to help you improve the game?
I think that's tough because, and Mason, Abe, you can speak to this too, but I think as coaches in particular, like one thing that a lot of students will be looking for, or as a coach that you want them to kind of have and credit to you, is you want them to have some kind of epiphany, like some level up moment, right? And there's a lot of content like this, which when they talk to players who have just had some success, they'll ask, well, what's your level up moment, right? What's the 15-second soundbite for what you can take away to improve? And I think often the lessons that you learn like are a lot less linear than that, and they can't really be distilled down into some before and after. So honestly, the way I improved, on the SCG tour, for example, is just I just played all the SCGs, and so that came about because I spiked events early, maybe before my own abilities or my assessment of them would be in line with that, and so that now gave me an incentive to just keep playing more of them. And as a result, I just got that experience playing that kind of event over and over again. And I think that's true for whatever level. So at the RCQs, right, I think one of the best ways to practice RCQs is just to practice RCQs. So like go to as many as you can, and you're going to take your losses, but hopefully learn from those, and so on and so forth. And you go from maybe going 3-2 a lot, 4-2 a lot, to like top 8ing a lot, and then hopefully to converting, and so on and so forth. But the best way is just to keep practicing at the level that you want to be at, which can be easier said than done, right? Like not every area has a bunch of RCQs you can go to every weekend, and then that also doesn't scale well. So how many chances at the Pro Tour are you going to have? If it's your first Pro Tour, then how do you prepare for that, given that this is the highest stakes event you're going to play? And now I have Worlds in 6 weeks, and I've never played an event like Worlds before and may never do so again, but I've got to somehow find some framework for approaching that makes sense, even though I can't really extrapolate from any of the previous tournaments I played before. So I think that's just one of the perpetual challenges. But yeah, I mean, the boring answer is just play a lot of those tournaments if you can, and then see where that takes you.
Well, I actually think this goes into something that I was talking about with some teammates this week, and it's a little bit more simplified the way that we were talking about it than the way that you were, but like learning to appreciate your plateaus and where you're at and assessing where you're at, rather than viewing that as a down or viewing it as a bad thing, right? You're talking about like, okay, I'm in the SCG tour, I'm playing all these SCGs. Currently, this is my common record at an SCG. Rather than, looking at it as how can I be better, it's like, here's where I'm at, what can I do from here, is kind of how you both approached both that, your comment about your first time Pro Tour and your first time Worlds.
So one thing that makes it tough to know where you're at and know what to take away from that is you could think of it as like you have like 4 lines on a graph or something, like those don't know what you call them, but like those heart takers or something at a hospital, where so you've got like your talent or your skill where it's at right now, you've got your results, you've got how you see yourself and where you're at, and then how other people see you and where you're at. And I think psychologically it's pretty difficult whenever two of those things become decoupled too far. So we'll have seen those people, right, who they spike a tournament and now their assessment of themselves is all the way up here, but their talent is still kind of lagging behind. But then their result that got them there is all the way up here, but then the way other people see them isn't in line with how they see themselves. And so actually getting all of that back on roughly the same trajectory can be pretty difficult sometimes. And just the nature of that is your results are not going to line up with how well you are improving or how well you think you're improving, because necessarily these are just like random points or spikes on the graph, whereas your ability is just hopefully a line that's like gradually going up, and maybe you have some of those epiphanies and there's a sudden spike there, but for the most part, your results when you have your breakthrough finish or whatever is going to come as something of a surprise, probably because there's no way to like schedule it, right? Like even if you think you're at the level where you could be doing that, then you're not going to convert every time. I saw and played against a lot of people who took longer to get to their first PT top 8 or whatever than I have done now. They were better players than me before and still are. And I don't think I am that much different than I was 2 weeks ago, but the scoreboard is going to say something different, right? So I think just trying to keep those in some level of balance mentally is pretty important, even though there's going to be a lot of pressure to like zig or zag in some other direction.
Yeah, I think to like what you just said there about like realizing what level you're at, I think often people find themselves in a spot where they're already sort of in the level and they don't really realize when they're crossing the line, as you described it, right? Where like you sort of enter that next one and you look back and you go, wow, I know so much more now, or I understand so much more now, or I'm so much better at something now than I was 2 years ago. And I don't even know when it clicked or whatever, it just sort of happened. And that is something that is sometimes frustrating, I think, for people, because people want to know and they want to track the improvement. But so much of it is, like you mentioned, sort of just keep going and rolling with the punches. I actually saw you reply to someone on Twitter the other day, Don, with something along the lines of like, so much of Magic is just like pushing yourself and handling situations like this when something went bad for somebody. And I think that is a lot of it, where it's like you mentioned, you have to play these events, you have to shoot these shots, you have to try. Technically, yes, some people, Jake Beardsley, they spiked the first Pro Tour or whatever, but how many PTQs did Jake lose, right, to get there, right? Just because he spiked one thing doesn't mean he spiked everything. And even if he does, it doesn't correlate like that, right? So I think it is really important just to keep all of that in perspective and sort of like remember it's a marathon.
I also think that just to like add to both what both of you just said, it goes back to your previous point, Dom, where, I know that there are times in coaching where I've coached people where I've said, like, you are good enough for the goal that you're trying to achieve. And it's about putting yourself in the situation enough times now that you have to put yourself in that situation. And it's about replicating results in order to get into the situations you want to get to, whether that's winning your RC2 or whether that's qualifying for the Pro Tour. Now it's about consistency and building consistent results. And I don't know, I really appreciate your perspective on that.
The other thing too is whether it's a long sample in terms of just playing a ton of tournaments or a long tournament like the PT, where it's 16 rounds over 2 days, like it is. The PT in particular is really a marathon, not a sprint. And so even if you start playing your A game, you're going to lapse in that at some point. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to feel exhausted by the end of the day, especially if ideally you're playing 2 full days of competition, you're in contention, playing high stakes matches towards the end. You're kind of playing the most important matches of your career at the point where maybe physically, psychologically, you're not as well equipped to handle those. And you probably are going to mess up at some point. And so how you respond to that is as big a determinant of success as anything else, really, because better players than me or you have messed up in those spots before and will do again. Hall of Famers, people with very distinguished careers. And so you kind of have to be ready for the fact that if you give yourself enough chances, you're going to miss some of those and you're going to miss because of your own mistakes. And like, if that's going to devastate you psychologically, you need to have some method for processing that in advance. Because I'm still haunted by some stupid mistakes I've made in matches, years and years ago. But if you're the kind of person who's going to be reliving that stuff, then you need to either find a way to handle that in advance or find some way to, as a matter of urgency, handle that after the fact. Because like you can't just be dwelling on that for the rest of your life. It's just you've signed up for an experience where your own limits are being tested, and like you're not perfect, right? You're not Stockfish or whatever. Like you are going to make mistakes, and so how you respond to that and rebound from that, especially in the moment, like this BC, I started off 0-2. I definitely made mistakes in drafting, deck building, gameplay that maybe would not have corrected that, but at least would have made me feel better about the fact that I was currently 0-2. And then, staring the abyss in the face there. And then on day 2, I had my feature match where, like, if I mess up, well, now I'm out of contention, but also I've just messed up on camera in front of thousands of people, right? Which that's going to affect people in different ways. And then, during the final stretch there, and then also in my quarterfinal match against Javier, I thought I really messed up that game 3. So as I lose game 3, and then game 4 feels like it's maybe slipping away from me, and I can already feel myself thinking, right, if I lose game 4 and then somehow lose game 5, how many times am I going to relive that game 3 in my head just over and over and over again? And if you're thinking that while you're playing the game 4, well, now you're more likely to lose the game 4 and then lose the game 5. Like you got to find a way to get that out of your head. And again, maybe the best way to do that is just to make enough of those mistakes and watch enough of those mistakes being made that it just becomes normalized. But like, that's not an encouraging answer in the moment, because if it's the first time that's happening, then what are you meant to make of that? So no clean answer there, I'm afraid.
So if I can ask, Dom, how does Dom Harvey, PT Top 8 competitor, Dom Harvey, get that out of their head in that moment? Like, what is, right, you're in that position, and I'm sure everyone here and a lot of people listening at home, they've felt that themselves of like, oh my God, I just made this mistake and now it's like going to cost me everything. How is it in that moment you're able to like let that go to play the game in front of you? Like, what's your internal process for that?
I don't know, really. I'll let you know when I figure that out myself. But I guess one tactic I use, I suppose, is to almost treat it like I'm playing one of those tower defense games or something, where I think it's easy if you understand you're playing a match against an opponent or a human being to feel like, oh, like they got me, or I'm outclassed by them, or how many times you see this at the local level, right? I'm better than them, so I deserve to win. And therefore, if I mess up, well, now I'm getting angry at myself or angry at them, which is like not on at all or whatever. It almost is better if you can depersonalize it. And yeah, I'm just trying to fight off the zombies coming from all directions or whatever. And yeah, at some point I'm going to miss one and I'm going to die, but I'm just going to keep that up for as long as I can. And then once I die, well, I reload, I have a few lives left in my stock or whatever, and I'll go again. And that's the way you've got to treat it, ideally. And for those longer tournaments, the upside is you actually do have a few losses to give. And so, yeah, you can afford like one loss to a bad matchup, maybe one loss to some like minor judgment call that turns out to go wrong, and then maybe one loss because, yeah, you blew that was all on you, but you're still live, and so you can rebound and go from there.
I mean, I'm 0-3 or 0-4 in SCG camera matches, and 2 of those I was up a game because I was a backup feature match. I don't know that helped me, Dom. Like, I don't know what I'm doing wrong here.
I mean, if were those eventually moved to the main table, then is that what you think was a difference maker? Or?
Oh, I don't know. I was mostly joking. I actually have a video on one of them, but I do think that for me specifically, like, there is a level of like caring too much what other people think, right? And like you kind of mentioned this in your moment about was it your what did you say, Javier? That was the one you mentioned. Like there is like a lot of that for me. Coming from where I come from in Magic, there's not a lot of opportunities for Utah players. And so anytime that I got the opportunity, I felt like I oversold it to myself a lot.
Sort of jumping off this is something I noticed about Dom, which is it's also weird to like think of Dom as my friend and like have him here now, because when I first started, before I played in the SCG, I wanted to learn Amulet, and we didn't have 80 page primers given out for free, written with love and care, where I couldn't go to Patreon, and I would watch like Dom and Pulliam and Edgar and Daryl and all these people, Dilks, play over and over and over again and watch. And one thing that I always really liked about Dom, and when I got to know him as well, is he was willing to try something and also willing to have the conversation where other people be like, oh, that's so bad. I remember clearly walking to dinner and Dom going something along the lines of like, y'all down to hear an interesting deck, and talked about a Jund deck that played Ashiok and War of the Spark in the main deck, and then had Croxos before that was normal and would mill itself. And then we went to dinner, we went back to the house, and Dom queued it up in a league and was like 2 games. It was like not good enough, but like you were willing to try it, and you weren't willing, like you weren't afraid to sound wrong or dumb or stupid, or, like certain people are so afraid to like say the wrong thing and like look silly. And you were just like, well, like, I don't know, this seems like could be good. What do y'all think? I don't have an answer. And I think being like that eternal student of the game is something that I've seen of you, where you're like, I don't have the answer. I have my thoughts, here they are, but like, what do you all think? And like that learningness, I think, is a part of the reason why you're gotten so good and you do so well. But B is like something I think a lot of people can emulate and learn from. I don't know if you even noticed about it yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I try to approach things with that attitude, but also a lot of the time, if there's like an easy answer to a question or something, then that question is kind of boring. So why am I still engaging with it, right? So I think that's why Magic has had this enduring appeal. I mean, to all of us and to so many other people. I'm almost 20 years in at this point, right? And a lot of games just don't have that level of depth to them. But Magic is constantly presenting you with these new problems, which in theory, some of your prior experience can carry over to, but you also got to figure it out from first principles a lot of the time. And those problems aren't easy and you're going to mess them up. And if you can mess them up with a kind of a humble attitude about it and try and learn something from it, that's going to be better than just assuming every idea you have is amazing and then getting angry when they don't work because like you're not the best in the world and some of them are going to fail, right?
For what it's worth, Dom, I was just kidding. Like, your answer was super helpful. I was just making fun of myself there. So each week on the show, we invite listeners of the podcast to ask a question on the show, and we have an awesome guest like top 8 Pro Tour competitor, Dom Harvey.
There it is.
We allow listeners to ask questions. The first one comes from Mikey. He says, what led you to making an 80-page primer on Amulet, and how did you decide to make it free?
Well, the answer to the first part is I wanted to, basically. I feel like if you have that level of put into a deck and you feel like you have enough of an understanding of it, it's almost a waste not to share that with people in some capacity. And I think the incentives of a lot of content these days, especially if it's in some kind of content hub or whatever, don't really point towards anything close to that long form. Like you maybe will be able to write some primer and like a longer sideboard guide or something about a deck, but that's meant to have some immediate benefit to people. So that if they have a tournament this weekend, they can just print it off and go to work. And that's fine. I mean, that's what most content should be. But I think there also should be a place for something which is just a love letter to a deck, basically, which for Modern, like going back to that topic from before, that's a format where you can nurture the same deck over the period of years, as opposed to Pioneer's getting some of that now as it grows older and so on. But like with Standard, for example, right, that is a lot more suited to here's 2,000 words on the deck and a sideboard guide, because that deck won't exist in a few months and it has to be tailored for the here and now. Whereas a deck like this, I think there is enough of a history that I want other people to be able to enjoy that. And I think learning that is actually useful in terms of understanding the deck now and how it's changed over time. But also, like, if for people who appreciate just the obscure stuff about Magic the way I do, it's kind of nice to be able to go and just see all of that stuff laid out in one place. So I wanted that to exist and no one else was going to do it. So I had to do it, is I guess like one way to answer that. But also, I think there is something to be said for being forced to get all your thoughts about something down on paper and frame it in a way that other people are going to be able to understand, helps you to understand it too. Because you maybe have to ask yourself things which like implicitly you were taking your stance on, but you didn't even realize you were doing that. So I think it's selfishly, it was good for me to do that as well. And then as for making it free, I think that realistically, who is going to read some mammoth document, right, unless they have a reason to? And I want that reason to be just sheer curiosity, as opposed to I already know that I'm interested. And so, you know, if that was paywalled, I think there would be a lot of people who paid good money for it, and I think they would all come away satisfied, like they got their money's worth. But also, there would be people who, if it was free and they could just wander in and out, would be interested. But if they have to cough up the however much I would have charged up front, maybe they wouldn't. And I want those people to be able to wander in and then get ensnared in, you know, the Amulet web.
When is the printable version coming out? Like I order it, like I like click
it's
a
called
button.
A book, Spencer.
Yes,
it's not a.
Yeah, thank you.
And as Dom's manager now, it's coming to Amazon very soon. You'll be able to pick it up.
Well, no, that's a PDF though. I want like the actual physical copy,
like with
like a nice
cover.
hardback cover. Yeah.
Yeah, we can commission the art. We can, you know, it's the printing, the smell of the paper, right? You know, it gets a new audience that maybe wasn't as invested in the the online document version.
Yeah, I wanted to have the same addictive ink that the old booster packs had. So you can just like sniff it as you're rifling through and just really inhale all of the good vibes there. But yeah, I mean, coverage actually loved this story about, oh, this is the guy who wrote a 80-page primer on the deck. So they quizzed me about it a bit. So I told them, yeah, it's about 80 pages and it's about 32,000 words. And at some point, those numbers like mashed together in their heads. So it became an 80,000 word primer, which that's just a book. That's not even like a document anymore. That's I don't want people to get their hopes up that it's that long, because it really isn't. And I've really said everything I have to say, I think. But
I have to say the primer is good. I read it, and when I was reading it, I was so mad that I was where I was now and not reading it 5 years ago, where the only way I could practice amulet matches was watching y'all's feature matches, pausing and trying to figure out what you were thinking, and then unpausing. It was so like, it was I understood boomers for a second when they were like, these kids have it too easy. That was just all I could think when I was reading it.
So
yeah, like, back in my day, yeah, we didn't have the stone tablets being given to us, you know. But I think the other thing too is when you charge for content, there is that pressure for it to have that relevance in terms of like, where's the sideboard guide, right? Where's the list that I can just grab and go? And one of the things I really tried to stress in that primer was, I don't have a list right now. Like if I post a list here, that list is going to be out of date by the time that you read it, because I'm trying new things, as you said. And also, I think
because we're going to end up on 61 cards for the Pro Tour.
Well, that too, of course. And like the core of the deck is what it is, but it is also surprisingly flexible in how you build it, how you play it, and so on. And so I can give you what I'm playing in the league right now. Like if you DM me on Twitter, I'll tell you that. But if I put that in the guide and present that as some official list, then I'm doing a disservice to you and also to the purpose of what the guide is. It's not meant for that. And likewise with the sideboard guide, right? If I don't know myself after playing dozens of matches against Murktide what I want my plan against Murktide to be, right, I feel almost dishonest in giving you a list that has these cards in it and I'm telling you what to bring in and out against Murktide, because I don't know myself yet, for sure. I don't want to like overstate my level of confidence in how you should build the deck, but I think that kind of giving you the tools to fish, if you like, is a better way to do that than just giving you a list you can grab and go, which, again, that's a valid thing for people to offer, and there are people offering that for Amulet, if you like, but I'm not going to be one of them in the context of that guide. And so I think keeping it free also helps to draw like a clear line in the sand between those different aims.
Our next question comes from Adrian, and I think that you finally answered this, but what led you to playing Titan at the Pro Tour?
Well, like I said, maybe if I'm being honest, I was always going to come back there in the end. I think also, ideally, you want Modern to be in a place where your level of experience with a deck, if you have that, is going to outweigh your level of comfort if you jump to the hot new thing. So if I'm playing Amulet at, I'm not going to say close to 100%, but close to that for me, if that's going to be a better choice than playing Scam or Rhinos or something with a 2-week lead in to practice, then I think the format's actually in a good place. So Mason, you will probably recognize the infamous Amulet copy pasta about, Amulet has remained tier 0, tier 1 or whatever through all these different iterations of Modern. And you can question whether it has or not. But I think what separates the times when Modern has been in a good place from where something has been broken and something really needs to change is you can play whatever your equivalent of Amulet is, and it's not good, but maybe it's like tier 2, or you can tread water with it. Whereas if it is like Hogak Modern or Valky Modern or whatever, then you really can't deceive yourself into doing that, because you're going to get smushed regardless of what you do about it. And it seemed to me, even though Rados Evoke was a great deck, and even though I thought Tron would be a good choice, or there were some other good choices, it didn't seem like something was so far above the pack that if you don't play this, you're just making a fundamental mistake. And so given that, I could play the deck that I wanted to play, which I thought also, made good use of the ring and so on. And given that I accidentally scammed a bunch of people into playing Tron, would also be a good choice against them when I played them. So that was not part of the plan, but it worked out perfectly. But
yeah, I would love for you to tell that story on here real quick, by the way, about how, let's be honest, everyone calls it Handshake Tron. I call it Harvey Tron from now on. That's where I'm at. All right, so can you tell that really quick?
Okay, so I didn't realize this myself until I got to the PT and heard this through the grapevine third hand. But so during testing, I was pretty dismissive of when people would say, we got to make sure we don't get lists published, or if you're 4 in a league, you got to drop so that it doesn't get in the 5-0 deck or something. And I was saying, well, okay, first of all, we're not playing anything that's that adventurous or outrageous that people have to sit up and take notice. And also, I would like to think that we're at the point where our reputations, our usernames demand that attention regardless of what we're playing. We aren't there yet, so we don't have to worry about that. The way that if Nathan's story gets published or something, like, you're going to pay attention to it. And so I'm just playing a build of Tron in a league, and it's a bit of a weird build, but it's I think how I would build it if I end up playing it. And I play against Scam or something, I beat Scam. Play against Rhinos, beat Rhinos. Play against something else, whatever. Lose to something that I forget at some point. What I didn't realize was that Rhinos player was Maddie Charisma of Team Handshake on an alternate account in a league, like in a Discord call. And so that beating that I inflicted upon the humble Rhinoceros was so savage that apparently they were less confident in just Rhinos as a choice and started really focusing their attention on Tron. And I'm not going to claim credit for all of that. Like, they were going to test Tron, right? And they were going to build it in a certain way and going to reach a lot of the same conclusions. Like the sagas that were in my list, they took notice of and then adopted themselves. And so when I was in the doldrums at O2, having heard the story, I consoled myself with the thought that at least I'm going to have some impact on this tournament, even if it's not the one I wanted. And then it turns out I got to run it up and beat Javier on that list in the top 8 en route to my eventual loss in the semi. So that was a nice bookend to that story arc too.
You actually kind of set yourself up for success by playing in the leagues on your main account. You put them in a position to knock them down at the Pro Tour. So what I'm hearing is maybe Nathan needs to play with the deck that he's good against his main deck. If he's going to play Amulet or whatever, he needs to be playing Tron in leagues. That way people copy him. I'm learning a lot here. I'm taking notes.
I like that we're pitting our previous guest against our current guest in a battle of wits unlike any other in history. Mm-hmm.
That's really the takeaway on how to improve in this episode is these elaborate mind games in the leagues. You gotta figure out the long con and then execute it to perfection.
If you're not willing to trophy with the worst deck possible, or maybe even the best deck possible, so you can play your rogue choice at the Pro Tour, I mean, are you really committed to trying to win the Pro Tour?
If you don't love me in my loot tree, you can't have me in my Yorion,
Well, yeah, look, Amulet needed all the help it could get for this PT, okay? I had to resort to drastic measures.
Dom, our next question comes from Don E., and he wants to know, what is the most enjoyable thing about playing Amulet, and what is the least enjoyable thing?
Well, most enjoyable is it's kind of a split between the games where you just turn 2 people, or you have the nut draw, and you get reminded why you chose this deck in the first place. You get that dopamine rush. But then it's also the games where nothing goes according to plan, and you have to figure out how to survive by the skin of your teeth while setting yourself up for to have some outs to win the game 2 or 3 turns from now. And it's like that puzzle quality that keeps the deck engaging after so many years. Where I've played Tron before, I was this close to playing it again, but Tron doesn't engage me and inspire me the way that Amulet still does, because for the most part, the games of Tron are pretty straightforward. What the plan is, even if you have to get there through kind of a meandering route sometimes. Whereas with Amulet, it's not even clear what the route is a lot of the time. You have to figure that out. Yeah, that combination of sheer raw power, but also this puzzle that renews itself time after time. It's the same way that, I play Magic after so many years because each new format or each new draft or whatever, it is a new puzzle to confront. And Amulet keeps presenting you with those new puzzles where I had some spots in the PT where it's I'm sure I encountered this exact spot 5 years ago or something, and I wish I could remember it more vividly now, but I've got to solve this puzzle again. And the fact that a deck can actually do that is pretty impressive, just given how rare that is in relative terms.
Well, kind of last questions from patrons, and then I actually have a question for you. What version of Tron would you recommend for upcoming RCQs?
This one is funny because when I was talking to the Handshake guys and learning the lore on how I accidentally scammed some of them, I was trying to puzzle out. It's okay, so once half of your team logged onto Tron, how many of you attempted to add another Con Liberator to your deck or add another way to just kibble your teammates and get a little bit of an edge in the mirror? And the trouble is, because A, they're the best players in the tournament for the most part, and B, they had a good list and they figured limited out and so on. Once they were deep in the tournament, they were actually at a disadvantage against more conventional Tron list in the hands of, Calcano, who is my teammate for the event, and so on, because if someone shows up with just good old-fashioned big boy Khan, they're going to have an edge in the mirror and so on. So it's a tricky problem, because if you think you've reached the right conclusion about this deck, and you think other people are going to reach that too, and it's not a hard one to reach, right? They're just going to net deck the list that the best players did well within the tournament. Well, then do you go to the next level and maybe give up some equity elsewhere just to get an edge in the mirror, which is kind of hard to do otherwise, right? The Tron mirror famously is, I guess, practice your die rolls or something. But I guess I think the handshake list is the most stable and the best at what it does. But if you have a hard read on what other people are going to be doing, then maybe you play like it's 2019 or something and go back to the last PT Barcelona and kind of do what those were trying to do, where it was just more of a all-out race to getting Tron on turn 3 and having the payoff. Whereas if it's going to be a bunch of like Ragavan decks and 4-color decks and control decks based around the run ring, then you can take it slow. You can assemble Tron on turn 4, and you want a list which can play a more stable game and isn't going to multi-4 in search of, Tron on 3 every single time.
I love it. My question for you, Dom, we actually talked about this. I don't know if it was last week or the week before. I talked about this with Mason. I've done coverage, commentary for a lot of modern tournaments. And I actually find covering Amulet to be one of the hardest decks to cover. Because for me, it's really hard to do play-by-play or even do color without talking about, like, what are the lines available throughout the next turns and how do the next turns play out? Whereas it makes you either make players look bad if they miss lethal multiple times, or if they take a different line. They go for, like, let's say, for example, that they go for a bunch of Titan after Titan turns rather than, presenting lethal in certain spots. How would you recommend players? Is there like an order of operations for the deck, or is there something that I, as somebody that does coverage for local RCQs and local 1Ks, can try and help players look good while playing what is a really difficult deck?
It is a really interesting problem for coverage too, I think, because first of all, you as the person who's in there as the authority figure, you have to know what's going on and be confident that you know what's going on. And then you have to figure out if the player in the seat is on the same page, they know what they're doing and what their goal is, and are they going to try and get there in the same way as you expect? And then presenting that to an audience who may not have the faintest clue what's going on in a way that's accessible to them. Like, all of that is very difficult. And doing that all at once, there are some trade-offs there. It's not easy to do all of it at once. So that it's a tough one. And in the past, I think, like when KCI was popular, for example, this was a deck that had this mystique as being it's very complicated and exploits a lot of these rules loopholes, and it's this kind of mad scientist deck which is hard to follow. And I think to some extent, if you lean into that too hard, it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy where if every time KCI is on camera, you build it up as, oh, this is impossible to understand, and who knows what Canister is going to do next, then no one's going to know what Canister is going to do next because it's your job to tell them when you're not doing that. So I think one answer would be lay it out in broad terms. Like, okay, is the goal here to survive the turn? Is the goal here to find lethal? Right? It's and that might be easier to suss out than exactly how you get to either one of those conclusions. And then if the player does something else, well, then you set that up as, well, okay, they think they can actually convert on a win this turn. What needs to happen for them to do that, right? Does this have to be a Dryad turn? Do the quick maths in your head. Is the Titan going to get there by itself? Does it need a friend along with it? If it's the Titan going solo, well, now is removal on the table, right? If there's a Solitude waiting in the wings, is that going to mess up everything? So I think setting it up in broad terms, I think is probably a better approach than trying to lay out the intricacies of, well, if they make this much mana and then they go through Talaria West and they transmute for this, I think getting deep in the weeds doesn't really benefit anyone necessarily. Once they are locking in on a line and actually doing that, then the play-by-play can step in and actually run through the motions there. But that's why it's important actually for the play-by-play to know that and to know where this is going, because if it is just listing the things that are happening on the screen, well, then that's going to be hard to follow itself. You need someone who has the foresight to know where this is going to guide them in that direction. But I think for the modern PT, right, that's a question which I'd like to think coverage was asking themselves is, when you have weird situations like this, how do you handle those? As opposed to if it's a turn one Fury Feign Death line, we've seen that before. We're going to see it again. It's also pretty simple to follow. Whereas my matches on camera kind of ran the gamut there. So there was one game where I had 2 amulets in play and just no lands for about 3 turns. And I knew on that last turn, if I drew the bounce land, I was going to win the game on the spot. And if I didn't, I was going to die. Like, the stakes were pretty clear to me. They probably weren't clear to the audience, and maybe not even clear to the people in the booth. And so them figuring out that puzzle together in an entertaining way was kind of crucial to that game looking as good as it did when I actually did roll the bounce land and was able to pop off and go through the motions, right? And then game 3 of that match was one of those games where, well, I don't have some impressive amulet draw. I have to like get scrappy with my Titan, and I have to find these specific lands to survive. And then next turn, if I draw this and I can do this, and that's an issue for coverage too, right? Like, if you don't know how it's possible for me to stay alive, then you're as lost as everyone else, and people can tell that you're as lost as everyone else. So it's not easy. And I probably made coverage's life a lot harder in the process. But
you validated me just now, though. It is one of my least favorite decks to cover, and it's because I'm both afraid of speaking out of turn and then also afraid of hurting the person on coverage, right? And like it's so funny because, you know, people have their opinions about Tron and things like that, but like even on coverage, one of the best moments on coverage was Christian finding a line that coverage did not see. Right. And so it makes you, like, when you're watching Magic coverage, you know, make sure that you're watching to learn, make sure that you're watching to improve rather than watching to be right. I think it's.
Yeah. I mean, as someone who, like, I've had my fair share of features before, I can take it now. Right. If someone in the booth is doubting what I'm doing or whatever, either I think they're right and I'm going to doubt myself anyway and be kicking myself, or I think they're wrong and I hope they don't get it wrong next time, but whatever. Whereas, you know, if someone is in their first feature match at an open or something, as Cedric or anyone who has been there will tell you, like, the first thing the people do once they get home from a tournament where they've been on camera is they go and watch their match on camera. And if what they hear is that person talking about how stupid they are for missing this obvious thing, well, that actually could, like, really tarnish their experience. So I guess knowing who you're talking about is the first thing. So if it's a regular at the store who is, like, talking a big game or is seen as one of the best players in the store, then you can maybe go out on a limb more about what they're doing and why they're doing it. And if you get it wrong, so be it. Whereas if it's like an up and comer who is just breaking through for the first time, then you want to make sure that you're, I guess, more charitable with them if they end up making a mistake, because, you know, they're going to be kicking themselves too, and you don't want to be adding fuel to that fire.
We had one last question for you, Dom, and this one is really targeted towards the modern format. So the time of this recording, it's the day of the modern BNR, but really the day of the modern unban. Yes. And I'm curious sort of what your thoughts are on preordain and sort of everything going on, and what your thoughts on the modern format. Hit us, because you're kind of a modern expert, you know, and we talked about this a little bit at the beginning of the show, but I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are.
It's exciting. I think if you'd asked me a few months ago, I'd have said, I don't know, this might be a little bit too dangerous, but I think it's a risk worth taking at a time where a lot of people are calling for bans. And if it's not banned, you need something to toss to the crowd, right? So exciting unbans, and maybe one way to do that. And I think this is an exciting unban. And the people who are saying, oh, is this really that much better than Serum Vision or something? Yes, it is. Let me tell you. So I think it's exciting, and I don't know exactly who is going to benefit most yet. Is it just going to be the Murktide decks who really wanted a sorcery for their Delirium cards now have a good sorcery and don't have to resort to Serum Visions? Or is there some blue combo deck which maybe wasn't quite consistent enough before, but now can actually find its pieces enough to make that worthwhile? And I think that actually the logic that was given for the legacy half maybe applies more to the modern half, where all of the interactive stuff in the format has been raised up quite a few notches by Modern Horizons 2, and it would be nice if the combo decks actually had something to match that. And so, you know, that logic was used for the Mind's Desire, Unban, and Legacy. I think, if anything, it might apply just as much, if not more, to the Preordain ban. If there is some combo deck that actually gets to compete now because of that, I think that's a good thing. Whereas there have been times where if you would let Preordain loose on the format, I don't think anything good would have happened. So I'm not quite sure what to expect yet, but I'm excited. I almost wish that some other stuff had come off along with it just to liven things up even more. But I think it was maybe a matter of time. I think, and this is a good time for it. And thank God it's Ponder and not, thank God it's preordain and not Ponder, excuse me, because I don't think you can do both. If you're going to do one, Ponder is just such a nightmare of shuffling and searching. It's awful. Whereas preordain is a fun card to play, fun card to watch. I'm glad it's that, and hopefully other people get to have fun with it too.
Yeah, the Ponder for coverage, right? Just like, no, I've lost too much time to shuffling. I can't lose any more of my life to pondering. It's Legacy's dead. Let Ponder go with it.
I want to love Legacy so much, but if you go back and watch a lot of old Legacy feature matches or something, it's impossible to follow because half of the game is happening off screen because one player is looking at 3 cards and then shuffling and then they're casting a brainstorm and putting some cards back, and hopefully it's the right number of cards, because if it isn't, then it's going to be a massive cluster, you know what.
You heard it here first. The savior of Legacy is Arena, being able to see all the cards that everybody has.
Sure, yeah, we'll go with that. Fine. But yeah, even when like the stuff is being done promptly and efficiently, so much of it is just off screen, and there's so much shuffling involved that it's just impossible to watch. So for that, if no other reason, I think Ponder is dead, long live preordain, and hopefully we all get to learn that lesson.
Well, Dom, thank you so much. Speaking of things that are fun to watch, things that are fun to consume, I'd like to give you a moment to talk about Dominaria's Judgment.
Yeah, I mean, it's a focus on constructed magic. It tries to be analytical. I mean, we joke around and we have fun with it, but it's trying to unpack a lot of the detail there and trying to go in depth on specific topics or debates or some of the history there. Like Ari is an old man now, and so am I. So we like to, reminisce about not just the good old days, but also the mistakes from formats past, sets in the past, or whatever that have some relevance to today, and try to bring people something that they can enjoy listening to, even if it's maybe more dry or more kind of narrow and specific than some of the other content out there.
Thank you so much for your time, Dom. Talk to me about the Temple Garden and the Overgrown Tomb behind you. Like, how did you come up with the background here?
So I started playing with Betrayers of Kamigawa, so early 2005. And so my first set as a newbie was Saviors of Kamigawa. One of the worst sets in the entire history of Magic. So once I survived that, I knew I was in for life. And luckily, we emerged from the desert intact, and the first full block after Kamigawa was the original Ravnica. So that set worked for me the way that it did for so many others, but specifically the art on the Shock Clans. Like when I went on the official website, which back in the day was this grainy mess of a HTML mid 2000s. They were trying their best, but it was a little suspect sometimes. But look, going onto that page and just seeing the art on Temple Garden in high definition, that's when I knew I was really in for life. And there have been other games that have come, like other competitors to Magic or clones of Magic, arguably, or other games in that space, which they're good for what they are, and they actually don't have a lot of the rules baggage or so on that Magic has acquired over the years, but they also don't have a lot of the aesthetic stuff that really does matter to me. So, other games don't have that right there. This one does, and so, I have that on my wall, and it's something that I love about Magic in the way that, I play other games, I dabble in other games, but they don't resonate in that way. And so I like looking at it, but it's also just a good reminder of why I'm still here after so long now.
I love that.
I just want to say that I am personally, for the listeners out there who don't really know much about Dominaria's Judgment, it is probably the number one podcast when it comes to Modern, and has been for about 2 years. Like the Modern format as a whole, it is so unsurprising to me, Dom, that you were able to take Amulet. I mean, not only because you're a great Amulet player, but also that in the realm of kind of the forgotten art of being the week to week, I love my deck gamer, that you of all people, with the amount of time you've put into understanding the format, its nuances, so forth, all of which are really well detailed on that show, that you were able to put together an Amulet list that was prepared for this kind of new world of Modern, as we were seeing it unfold for that Pro Tour, and have the build that was able to be as successful as you were. So again, hats off to you, and definitely listeners, go check out Dominaria's Judgment. You will learn a ton. There's still tons of backlog episodes where I'll go back and listen and be like, oh yeah, like now the whole format makes a little bit more sense to me in terms of what's going on, because you two do a really good job with it. So
I appreciate that. And we try to, if it's a slow news week or something, broaden our focus a bit. So we had an episode on vintage recently, which was fun to us to do, when else do you get a chance to talk about vintage? But also for the people out there, who else is going to tell you about vintage, right? So I'd like to think there's a handful of people out there for whom like that is the episode that they've been waiting for however long. And, there will be more stuff like that. We're trying to broaden our focus a bit to, interviews with other players and just other looks at Magic history and so on, because there is so much there to be unlocked, right? And so we're just off in our corner doing our own thing. But even in a podcast market that is so saturated and so full of people, I'd like to think that we can all just like play nice, I guess, and you guys are doing your thing, we're doing our thing. There's going to overlap a bit, but when it does, that's hopefully a source for like collaboration and people, each other's fan bases discovering each other as opposed to anything else. So I mean, as a lover of Magic, I like to think that I can do justice by it, and that's one way I'm trying to do that.
I echo what Abe said, and then I think we've said everything and we've sang our praises. I'll say this: I was helping my mom move on Saturday, and I was like lifting all these heavy book boxes, and I kept checking in. I checked in right as you were winning your round 13, and I thought, holy, Dom's a round away, I'm pretty sure, from top 8ing, and if he top 8s this so much Tron, this dude's going to be great as long as he doesn't run into scam or whatever. Like, I'm not be surprised, because if you look at the results, Dom really is one of the people that has done consistently super well over Modern in this era where we haven't had as much spotlight on Modern. If you like follow the Man Trader stuff or look at challenges and other things, Dom's just consistently in there. So it's not a surprise, especially when I learned you had like 3-0'd your second draft. I'm like, oh, well, it's just going great, whatever. And it was great to see you sort of crush it. And then, unfortunately losing the top 4, but it was great to just see you do your thing and sort of, I would argue, get rewarded for putting time and effort into the game. And that's the thing I think everyone thinks about. And I think you're a great content creator, a better person, and, a slightly worse player than you are a person, but you're such a good person. That's some high praise, Dom. So for our topic, consider Dom Harvey. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Bigger number, better person, and I try to live by that maxim.
Exactly. I'm so proud of you.
I'd like to give a special shout out to friend of the show, and somebody that means a lot to me personally, Alexander Hain, for making this podcast possible. Thank you so much for,
I want to thank him too, by the way. Yes.
We do have an episode with Hain if you want to go back and check it out. Hain talked about how to deal with tilt. I think that was something he did this past weekend as well. And it's an important part. We bring up tilt a lot in Magic. Sometimes you get someone doesn't scoop.
I don't think that's what the episode was about for what it's worth.
No, I think it was. I think you should go back and listen to it.
No, well, I mean, I was like weirdly immune from tilt over the course of the weekend, because after I got off to such a terrible start and had this just cheated death to not open my pod, I was in this mindset where like anything good that happens from now on is just a free roll, right? Like if I can somehow run this up into re-qualifying, like that's a stretch goal at this point. But if it happens, great. And if not, well, whatever. And so I'm not going to say people should start off their tournaments in the worst way possible, but if that happens, it can become something that is like weirdly liberating. And you just no expectations now, just play your matches and see what happens.
For what it's worth, I think Alex qualified for Worlds. I think he's happy with his result, but it was so funny to watch live with my friends. I was like, as a friend of Alex that cares deeply, I was rooting for him so hard, and then I didn't even know what the result meant, Dom. I was like, because you're friends with my friends, so like, that happens. I was like, what does this mean? Is Alex locked for top 8 anyway? It turns out no, that my friend's friend is locked for top 8 and now gets to have the run of the lifetime.
Well, I didn't know what it meant at the time either. So I had to be caught up on what was happening around me. But I had told my friends and a bunch of other people I got 9th, right? Because that's what I assumed I was locked for. I didn't want them to like learn the bad news or wait for that for too long. From my perspective, 9th was, I mean, I'd made my peace with that. It's a great finish after what I thought was a terrible start. And then I had to be informed by coverage and by my friends that like, no, your weekend's not over yet. Let's not close this book too soon. And then, that was the final twist in a very, very strange weekend.
Anything you want to say before we let you go, Dom?
No, I'm good. Thanks for having me on. I just got finished podcasting with Ari earlier. So after that, rapid turnaround to this. I don't know how coherent I am still, but hopefully was able to deliver some pearls of wisdom or pearls of something for the people out there.
And you crushed it. For those listening, like I think that you've probably listened to Dom's judgment before this show because I think it'll probably come up first. But if not, take a moment. Don't change the podcast on your drive unless you're pulled over at a stoplight. But go take a listen. And thank you so much, Dom, for coming on. Wow, that was such a fun thing to do with Dom. If you want to join the conversation, don't forget to hit the Patreon Discord. That's for patrons of $5 or more. You can join the public Discord. We have fantasy football for the He's the Game Media Discord going on. We've also got monthly Smash nights if you want to play Smash. I think one of our patrons said that we are in the golden age of fighting games on Twitter this week. So if you're interested in learning Smash, you got to switch. You want to learn that, like, the public Discord is a place to do that. We talk about Magic. We talk about games, anime, Mason. You can also leave a comment on the YouTube channel. We've got a lot of comments this week on our shorts. We're doing more shorts, so other people can find us. It's really cool to see the interaction on there. You can also follow us on Twitter at CCMTG, or on X, I guess I should say. And then you can check out Sam's podcast, Drafting Archetypes, every week on the network. And like, sub, review, and comment is the best way to support the show. Where can people find you, Abe?
People can find me over at twitter.com/morenothings. It's still twitter.com, even though the brand is X. Weird, but, that's both place to find me.
If you put in x.com, it does bring up twitter.com.
It's twitter.com. I have a bookmark on my desktop that says Twitter, and when I click it, it goes to something that says twitter.com. So as far as I know, it's still Twitter. But yeah, you can find me there. You can DM me for coaching. I'm doing a little bit less now. Probably only have 1 or 2 slots available. But, let me know for that. And then, otherwise just giving my thoughts to the universe until that website shuts itself down. How about you, Mason?
You can find me over at twitter.com at Mason E. Clark. You can find me each and every week at Card Kingdom writing about something. This week I wrote about the BNR. You can find me at twitch.tv/the Mason Clark. And you can find me, like I mentioned before, at the Apex event in Caldwell, Ohio. And then I'm going to the Durham Extra Life tournament next weekend, which would be August the 18th. So that's going to be really fun. And Spencer, where can they find you?
Yeah, so I'm not on social media right now. Follow the podcast to interact with me. I'm probably the one that's tweeting from there or whatever. But after this contract does up with my new job, I plan on streaming again at the Heezy Media Twitch channel, as well as making videos on the YouTube channel. So just follow the podcast and the content that you love, and I'm sure that you can interact with me. Yeah, that's going to do it for this week's episode. Mason, we love you, man. I hope that whatever's happening with your phone is really great. I'm see everybody next week with another episode of Constructed Criticism.